Okay, welcome Ooh, that's loud, sorry. Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming this afternoon. I'm Brooke Stearns-Lawson. I'm the Experimentation, Innovation, and Learning Team Lead in USAID's Anti-Corruption Center. And I am thrilled to be joined by my colleagues on the panel today, who I'll introduce at the start of each of their interventions. I'm excited to be here today, where we'll explore the power of the private sector to tackle corruption. This is the light side of the public-private civil society tripartite partnerships and engagements. As many of us in the room know, flourishing democracies are good for business, and conversely, good businesses are a powerful engine for democratic governance. This is particularly true in our commitment to transform the fight against corruption. There is now broad consensus that even state-of-the-art compliance programs, while important, are not enough to prevent corruption in the private sector. A culture of ethics and integrity in the public and business sectors is essential, and the private sector can help incentivize this culture and enforce anti-corruption norms that hold corrupt actors accountable. Businesses are not mere targets of anti-corruption regulation and prosecution, or victims of its pernicious impact. They can also be key players in that collective action we've been discussing so much here this week to fight against corruption, as we will hear from our panelists today. Before I turn over to our panelists about the ways in which the private sector is playing this important role in countering corruption, I want to highlight two complementary efforts spearheaded by USAID's Anti-Corruption Center. First, USAID's Anti-Corruption Center has supported the Countering Transnational Corruption Grand Challenge for Development that issued a call for innovations from the private sector or non-governmental organizations partnering with the private sector. We received more than 100 concepts and will soon be announcing the most promising solutions to move the needle on corruption and demonstrate that anti-corruption efforts can be good for business. By using USAID's funding to leverage co-investment from the private sector, we can ensure that these solutions meet the demands and needs of the private sector and be sustainably implemented. At the same time that we incentivize integrity, we also recognize that some private sector actors facilitate corruption. We are also bringing new resources to address this complex problem. Under the Global Accountability Program Strengthening National Architectures to Counter Corruption Activity, or GAP-SNA, USAID has initiated a new 3-year, up to $3 million work stream to strengthen preventative and legal frameworks needed to address the enablers of corruption within gatekeeping professions, improve information sharing and international cooperation in addressing enablers, and enhance self-regulation and incentives for integrity within relevant gatekeeping professions and sectors. I hope that you had a chance to learn more about this exciting new effort earlier today at the technical workshop that my colleague hosted. This is important work that complements the efforts our esteemed panelists will share more about now. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Jose Luis from USAID Mexico. He is the Transparency and Anti-Corruption Team Lead, and he will share about incentivizing integrity of small and medium enterprises. Over to you, Jose Luis.
Sure. Thank you, Brooke. And just continuing what Brooke was mentioning, USAID's work, we do a lot of anti-corruption work among different parts of the world where we have missions. And one of them is Mission Mexico, and then Ahmad will talk about Indonesia. But we work a lot with civil society, with governments, with academia, but also as well with the private sector. And this is embedded on the U.S. strategy countering corruption, but also on our USAID policy, anti-corruption policy, that the private sector has a particular role on anti-corruption efforts. And we have a mission of amplifying that role of the private sector. And it said, like, to dance tango, you have to have two persons to dance tangos, the private sector and the government, or the government and the government, or the private sector and the private sector. So this is kind of like our role of the private sector looking into being part of the cause, but also being part of the solution. And that's kind of like where we are embedded when working with that counterpart and the private sector. And I think starting from a very important point is I think a rule number one, and probably Alexa can prove me if I'm wrong, but the number one rule rule for the private sector, it will be profit. If you're not doing profit, it doesn't work at all. Even from the big enterprise to the person who's a vendor on the street, if you're not doing profit, you're probably not going to be there. And that's kind of the rule number one. And from an anti-corruption perspective, we usually support code of ethics, code of conduct, anti-corruption practices. But I think if the private sector doesn't understand that this is part of the for-profit, it's not going to change a lot. So this has to be like, this anti-corruption practices need to be embedded, need to be implemented, and need to be adopted. And for sure, it needs to be sustained in order to move the change or do a difference out there. And I think looking into the name of our panel, which I will emphasize on the game changer part, this is what we want to talk about a little bit over here, is how to work with the private sector, not only to do more trainings, not only to do more capacity building, but also to form them as a game changer. And I will look into, and I will talk about especially medium, small enterprises, because the big enterprises, they all have it all. They're accountable to FCPA and many other norms, but the small and medium ones are different. And this is what we've been working in Mexico recently under particular conditions, because the relationship between U.S. and Mexico, it's not only we share a frontier out there, but it's big, strong commercial relationships embedded into the U.S., Mexico, and Canada trade agreement, which has an anti-corruption chapter 27, but also high-level economic dialogue among countries. And the private sector is a key player in all of those roles, and also within the nearshoring. So something that we have done, worked in this side, is working with those SMEs in a term of like helping them out to build up anti-corruption practices, and not talking only about what I was mentioning on the codes of conduct, the code of conduct of ethics, but more on practices that are really sustainable for a matter of time. And we have done this in 5 different states with very particular coaches for each one of those enterprises or companies that have worked with us along various sectors important for the relationship within U.S. and Mexico, which are the automotive industry, the aerospace and electronics, and also the construction sectors. So they work on a 6-month program, which helps them out to build up these practices. But in order to build those practices, I'm mentioning about internal controls and whistleblowers and also other standards, they have this gap of 6 months to build them up, but also to hold them sustainable. So one important part of that is how you measure it. And I heard that yesterday and the day before on another panel. It's very difficult to measure how you improve in terms of anti-corruption for a company. And I think someone mentioned it's the number of practices that you have enabled, but it's also the number of complaints that you have solved or not. But within the program that we have implemented in Mexico, it's 242 compliance and measures implemented and more than 72 companies, but I think that number doesn't say much. And I think it goes more about the stories that has happened with each one of those companies that we have worked with. And just to mention one of them or a pair of them is, for example, we worked on a company that sells recycled clothes or rags. And you can mention this is a small company of 15 staff. That's it. The amount of like this size of the room. It's like, who cares about this small company and why do they care about compliance? It's because they have defined that they are selling those recycled clothes for the automotive industry. So if they want to be part of a big enterprise and their big enterprise supply chain, they have to comply with this. So they have been a key role model for other companies to have a very complete compliance policy within their 15 staff. And they have been moving up the needle for other companies that look at them as like, if they can do it, we surely can. And another example is in the state of Sonora, which is up in the north in Mexico. We also work with a mining supply company that they implemented successfully their practices. But what they were saying is that in that particular state, there's only 5 companies that supply the mining industry over there. They're one of them. So they already changed their mind, they're implementing, and they're willing and kind of pinching the other 4 to be part of that movement. And they say, like, if we only change those 5 companies, all the mining industry within that state will be anti-corruption, like corruption-proof, anti-corruption-proof, and that's kind of like the mentality embedded to be part of this as a key player, and I think. Just to wrap it up, I think this is part of the construction that we're doing and the process that we're working with private sector in most of our missions, but particularly in the mission in Mexico, is helping them out to bring their resource, but also to be a key player as part of the private sector. And we're not only doing this in this key sectors, but also other missions, like for example, Paraguay is working with the banking system, which banks is a lot different sector, but it's also working together to have efficient compliance practices within the banking system in Paraguay. And I think just to close it up, that's what we're supporting out there to be efficiently the private sector to be a key game player and a game changer in anti-corruption practices. That's it.
Thank you so much, Jose Luis. It's great to have the concrete example, too, to be able to really see how a 15-person company plays a critical role in a global supply chain. So thanks for that's concreteness as well. So next, we're going to turn it over to Claudia. She is the Regional Manager for Latin America, Europe, and Middle East at the German Cooperation for Development, GIZ, and also the Anti-Corruption Director at UN Global Compact Germany. And she is going to share more about a multi-stakeholder initiative.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Yeah, what is in it for me? That is the question that I've heard throughout nearly all panels that look towards business integrity, that looks towards trying to get companies to do more, to go beyond compliance, not just simply abiding by the law, but actually do additional work and enforce their social responsibility. Jose also just said it. And he also said what we need to do to get that. We need to incentivize them and see so that they see that this is added value. And we need to address things that are part of their core business. This is also something I've heard like yesterday already. And a lot of people have also provided different answers to what is in it for me, looking from a company perspective. Some of them have been mentioned here today as well. So addressing anti-corruption challenges for companies can mean that they increase trust with business partners, with customers, with employees. It can increase visibility of the company. It can provide a reputational advantage. It can increase access to business opportunities and funds. And Alexei yesterday mentioned also, it's really good to be able to co-create, to take ownership and be part of those that create the framework in which we afterwards also have to operate. So have this kind of dialogue is quite important. We also heard a little bit about the how just now, but it was cut mostly short. Most of us work with collective action initiatives. But I've heard a lot of companies and also government representatives asking about practical solutions and opportunities for engagement, that they need them, and especially with regards to this multi-stakeholder initiatives as well. So I want to present a bit more about what the Alliance for Integrity does, because we offer exactly that. And later on also go into a bit more details about some practical approaches that we have, and then later hopefully discuss a little bit about that. So the Alliance for Integrity is a project that is implemented by GIZ. We are commissioned by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, the BMZ, and we are active since 2015 working as a business-driven, multi-stakeholder initiative. And it's already very complex to say it like that, especially when we talk with SMEs. I don't think that they actually know what we mean by that. So we say we are business-driven because we actually started out of the demand from the private sector. So as Brooke said in the beginning, I also represent the 10th principle inside the UN Global Compact. And there, the German companies during that time said, okay, we want to work on our own internal problems and also our own systems, etc. But we would also like to address the needs of our supply chain, the SMEs that are part of our supply chain. And this includes, of course, capacity building, but this also includes changing the framework conditions of those companies, because we've heard they face completely different challenges in some cases. So this is how actually we already were born out of a private sector demand. So this is why private sector driven as well. They play an active role and multi-stakeholder, because we of course also work with public sector and also with civil society organizations in many different countries. And the overall goal is to promote integrity and transparency in the economic system. It also sounds very high level. It's also very unconcrete when you think about it a little bit more. And we are a global initiative. So we work in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, and also in Europe. So it's all very complex what we do. So bear with me when I go through all the things. What is really important is that our members, they set the agenda. Like, we provide a neutral platform where they can exchange. Of course, there are limits to what we can do. We try to always bring back the focus to anti-corruption, because nowadays we want to talk a lot about human rights, which we also work with. We want to work with climate, the nexus topics that we have, but we try to focus back on anti-corruption. And it's a way for them to openly discuss their actual interests, because there come different interests together. It's important that we be honest about that as well in some cases. Maybe if we all have the same goal, but we want to have different ways on getting there. And in the cases that we find consensus, we implement together. And this is exactly where the private sector then also comes in. So we have a lot of different solutions that we offer together as Alliance for Integrity. We have peer-to-peer learning formats. We have huge working groups that work over the regions of Latin America, for example, on the topic of gender. We offer public-private dialogues where we talk specifically also on topics that are a little bit more delicate with public procurement, where we sometimes feel that it's good that the civil society at the beginning maybe steps out of the room and then later on for the solutions comes back, because to have an honest, trustful dialogue is quite important. We work on awareness raising, on knowledge exchange. We have conferences and workshops, so you're all invited. Our next regional conference is between the 27th and 29th of August in Chile. Shameful, I'm making like here. And we offer guides. One that I really like is the No Excuses Guide, which offers like the 10 most used excuses for companies, why they are corrupt, but also how to debunk them. So the smaller companies can use that also inside their organizations. And we work with capacity building, which is a training program that we have that we call From Companies to Companies. And here we offer compliance trainings for small and medium-sized companies, but it's implemented, or the trainers are actually from big companies. And those trainers, they are already compliance experts. They know a lot about what the law says and also what the rules and regulations say, but they don't really know how to talk to SMEs. Often, they know how to talk to their own employees, they know how to talk maybe to their supply chain, and this is a big maybe in some cases, but they don't know how to talk to the general SMEs in their countries. So they learn it from us, they get the material from the Alliance for Integrity, and they get the didactic from us. We train with them, they receive like this training program, and afterwards they can go out and work pro bono for the Alliance for Integrity and implement our trainings and teach small and medium-sized companies on how to implement an effective compliance program tailored to their needs, of course, like not like the big companies would do it. So this is also a way that the companies can engage with us. And last but not least, we also offer something that we have been working on for quite some time as well in parallel. This is support to incentive and certification programs. So we do not offer any kind of certification or seal or something like this. Everybody who knows a little bit about this also might know why. It's very complicated to do so, and it's a lot of risks involved as well. But what we do is we try to support those that we think that have like a multi-stakeholder approach, that try to listen to civil society as well, and that actually also promote additional support to companies when they want to adhere to the seal, especially those that look towards SMEs. And one I want to highlight, and now we come to the practical part as well, is our integrity seal from Paraguay. It is really also an example to show how we put private sector into the center of developing the program, because they were part of the development of the seal itself. And it also builds on different other solutions that we have already identified before. So we had the public-private dialogue in the beginning to identify how. We have peer-to-peer learning. I will later talk a bit more about that, because it was an exchange between the Brazilian already existing seal from the CGU, which is the Controller's Office in Brazil, and they presented to Paraguay how they did it. Paraguay adapted it and made it a bit different to their needs. And we had includes offers of awareness raising as well. So of course our publications are part of it. We have a digital tool which is called the Integrity App, specifically tailored also to the needs of the Paraguayan anti-corruption agency. And we offer trainings as well in there. And there the companies from companies to companies trainings comes in again. I don't know, I think I'm already running a little bit out of time because the clock here is a little bit like that. I just wanted to say that we implement that in Paraguay with the Paraguay National Anti-Corruption Secretariat, the SENAC, and together with the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, because this is important to highlight the partners that have been working with us for a long time. And yeah, maybe later we can talk a bit more about what kind of incentives this seal offers to SMEs, including all of those that we have already mentioned, like visibility, etc., and how we train with them. And yeah, generally speaking, maybe very quickly, we now, for the training, and this I think is at the core and at the heart of what the Alliance for Integrity does, we have already more than 300 active trainers at the Alliance for Integrity, and we have trained over 4,500 representatives from SMEs and from other organizations. And for us, it's really important to highlight this pro bono work that the companies are doing and also the effort that the SMEs are taking, because it's like a 1-2 day training. Take 1 or 2 days out of an SME to sit down, to talk about anti-corruption, to talk about integrity. It's a big investment. So yeah, this is how, at least inside the Alliance for Integrity, the private sector can be a game changer for anti-corruption and integrity.
Thank you so much. Wow, what a comprehensive and multifaceted program, and you clearly articulated it out for us. That's really exciting to hear about the great work. I'm going to turn over now to Ahmed from USAID Indonesia, and he was going to speak more about state-owned enterprises.
Thank you, Brooke, for your introduction. Yeah, it's different. Like other panelists talking real private sector, but us working with the SOEs. Why SOEs? Because in Indonesian context, it is a very important element that spur the development and manage public money. And by the law, corruption law in Indonesia, then they are under the purview of the law, and that's why we need to really work on those things. Why? Because I started by stating the fact that from 2016 to 2021, there were at least 119 corruption cases involving the SOEs. And how much money was lost? It's about $2.9 billion US. And it's increasing. So that's why I think this is very important for us to work on the private, on the SOEs. So with that, actually, what we started doing is by 2022, we started a program called Indonesia Integrity Initiative, where one of the elements is about promoting integrity in the SOEs, both at national and local levels. The program is currently in progress, so that's why it is a work in progress I want to share. There are some initial results, but still it is something that we need to look further for sustainability. And in this program, we argued that the core of the problem is conflict of interest. That's why we are working to improve the enabling factors and capacitating the actors to better manage conflict of interest so that they are able to uproot the problem of corruption. So what do we do actually so far from 2022 to date? 3 things. First one is we do awareness raising. through campaign and dialogue on the vulnerability of the SOEs towards corruption. And second one is we do the assessment on the transparency and compliance of the SOEs on the anti-corruption and business integrity principles. And the third one is the capacity building and technical assistance so that they can do the job and they can be accountable in managing the public money. What is important I want to share here is the fact that we don't use anti-corruption words in our works just to make sure they are receptive. So we use the word improving business integrity. So it's just to make sure that they are receptive and they really work with us along with the line of what is the Indonesia Corruption Eradication Commission working, that it emphasizes the need for improving the business integrity in the private sector. So the first strategy we do is facilitating the various workshops, public campaigns, targeting SOEs, especially to discuss about the challenges of business integrity and the importance of ISO 37001, that is on anti-bribery management systems. Why we take this one? Because we thought that this is very important and very flexible to be used and adopted by any type of organization, regardless of the challenges or bribery risk that they face. And for the second strategy, we conducted SOE readiness assessment through integrity risk assessment, or IRA, and for national SOEs. And then we also do the transparency in corporate reporting, especially for the local SOEs. And then through IRA, we expect to have kind of identified potential risks in key business processes where they can follow it up as a priority focus or priority work. And with that, we do the piloting with the Indonesian company, a forestry company, because the program is really having an environment angle on it, working with the companies or SOEs that are focusing on the natural resource management. So we assess their commercial logging business processes and reviewed their internal control system. So with that, we followed up with the action plan to make sure that those identified risks are tackled. On the local SOEs, we identified using TRACK, or the Transparency in Corporate Reporting. It tries to identify, so assess the policy transparency and compliance of local SOEs to the anti-corruption principles. We look at aspects such as anti-corruption commitment, the scope of anti-corruption policies, appointment of leadership, as well as on the programming on anti-corruption. And the result was not good. Out of 47 local SOEs that we identified, mostly scored below 5 out of 10. So the average is 2.7. So it's really terrible in the way like it is really homework to improve their capacity. And really it is frustrating, but then we need to move forward. What we do? We conduct technical assistance, we conduct training, and we also develop action plan, as I mentioned earlier. For the capacity building, we also provided training to the SOEs, especially on the financial fraud detection, as well as on the internal control system review. As for the SOEs at the national level, we also provided opportunity for them to learn. We develop a curriculum that works on the improvement of compliance as well as the openness of the information to potential state-owned companies that we are working on is with the port operation company. I think you guys are working with them. Also, National Electricity Company. They are the one that will be targeted by our program in the coming years. And for the local SOEs, we provided training using our long-term investment on the Academy Anti-Corruption or Anti-Corruption Academy, where it is used as an online platform, a learning platform for them to learn about corporate corruption, what it is and how they respond to these challenges. So with that, the academy is a very important part in our engagement with the local SOEs. It complements what the Indonesia Corruption Eradication Commission is doing through the capacity building that they're doing. So in closing, I would say that the work is long term. It is a marathon. It's not a sprint. We cannot see immediate results, but then we keep on continuing the work that we are currently doing. I need to acknowledge the partnership that we are having with the local CSO partners, Kemitraan, Indonesia Corruption Watch, TI Indonesia, and Basel Institute on Governance in making this marathon moving forward. So, over to you, Brooke. Thank you.
Thanks, Kasai. Thanks. That's a great way to end the marathon. We'll think about the long road ahead and the commitment that we have. That's a great point. I'd like to introduce our fourth speaker, Cecilia. She's the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network Chief Executive Officer, who's going to share more about private sector collective action in the maritime industry. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Before going into what we actually do, I just want to say a few words about shipping, because I assume, we are not all experts of this particular industry, and it is relevant for explaining what we do. So I think, first of all, shipping is global. Everything you wear, everything you eat, like 90% of all the cargo is transported on board vessels. So, of course, a huge impact of the industry that we're working with. We have large international players. We have quite of a complex value chain that goes all the way down to local port agents, like a local mom and pop shop that is ultimately serving, an oil major. So it is a very complex trade chain. It's also an industry that is quite exposed to corruption risk. There's a lot of touch point with government officials. When a vessel enters into port, there are multiple government interactions need to take place to get the vessel, the cargo offloaded and get the vessel to start to operate. We also operate in multiple jurisdictions, so 24/7, constantly changing location. And the people who are faced with the risk often is very far away from headquarters, right? So it's a moving risk in a sense, right? And when a vessel enters into the port, it's a multi-million-dollar value type of cargo. So, it's not just, facilitation payments, we're talking a wide range of corruption risks. And this is an important part of the story in terms of incentivizing why private sector believes that it is so important to come together. I worked as a senior compliance officer for a multinational shipping company. That was the first 10 years of, I won't say my life, but my professional career. One of the foundations of why the private sector in the maritime got together was because all of us were really seeing the risks that Frontline was faced with. And I don't think that's unique for shipping. There will always be someone in any private sector that is the one who goes up to an official and has to kind of reject a demand or not initiate a bribe or whatever it can be. So there's always a person that is faced with that risk. So we try to centralize the incentive around those people, right? And I'll give you a concrete example, if I'm coming blonde from Scandinavian headquarters and you have 70 captains in a room who've been sailing for 30 years, and you're supposed to explain the implications of the UK Bribery Act to that audience, and you're supposed to articulate the program they're supposed to follow. There are 3 questions that are, I would say, slapped back at the lawyer without, and that is, what's our peers? What's our competitors doing? If we are standing there and we are the only one that says no and everybody else just continue to nurture the wheel, then what is the implication on me? Then they will say, what are governments doing? We are the ones in their mind that are carrying the burden of world trade, and we are going to these countries who have corruption risk. Why are they not taking actions in what's supposed to happen in their front yard? And then the third one is that I've been sailing for 30 years. This is how things always have worked, right? And the UK Bribery Act or even US FCPC or anything is not going to change that mindset because they are faced with these risks every day. So it was all about taking those perspectives, bring that back to the table, and start initiating that conversation with the industry, because ultimately an anti-corruption program has to be about the one in the front line believing that code of ethics or believing in that training. And if we fail there, you can have any due diligence, any risk assessment of the world, you will still not be successful. So I think centralizing, the employee was really, really important. So, and also be able to tell management, you need to be able to respond to those 3 questions. Otherwise, you can have as much tone at the top as you want to, because no one's going to believe in that. So we need to see if you agree with me on the next one. But so I think that the incentivization of the private sector is really to try to be able to say we want to support frontline. It's not necessarily about the fear of prosecution. It can surely be used as a good argument, but it's one of the arguments. And if you centralize anti-corruption compliance around the safety of the employees and supporting them, it's a completely different business phase, even for multinationals that operate in 50, 100 countries. Because another element that is so important is also that even multinational companies suffer the consequences of rejecting corrupt demands. I think also there's this feeling that it's only the SMEs, or, I mean, we had, I worked for one of the largest shipping companies in the world who wanted to do something about this. Like, still, I mean, in the initiative we have today, MSCN as an organization, we have multinational companies who are faced with this transaction risk every day, but they want to do something more about it. So I think that's where we also need the peers of a specific sector. All of them needs to stand their ground. And I think also, of course, what we see now, the past, I would say, 2-3 years, that we see a trend in certain jurisdictions that, we need to support our suppliers much more, we need to vet our suppliers much more. And of course, that's just going to, sorry to say, but the suppliers is going to be faced with a lot of more paperwork because these big companies who are on top would want to comply with that. So by initiating a collective action, you can kind of like incentivize also the suppliers to say, okay, I want to have a part, I want to be a part of this. I want to be a part in the change in the market that I'm operating. And that's, again, a very important vehicle to bring private sector together, but also incentivizing not just a big company, but also a smaller company. That I can sit next to a customer, I can sit next to a peer, and I can sit next to a supplier. And that equation is really, really important. So that's I think that incentivized the private sector, coming together. And then I want to point out the government's role in this, because I do think governments who are very ambitious about the agenda, governments who want to see the business they have in their market to succeed in high-risk market also needs to ask their question, how can we support our business to grow and to be present in the markets that also presents a high risk, right? And that is also something that I think the private sector is always focused. How do you support a business that operates in a high market, and you can use the slogan, who are you going to call? I mean, we all know the, Ghostbuster, because that's what every business wants to know. If there is faced with a challenge, if it's customs or if it's another transaction, who can I support? Who can I call to support? So even multinationals will ask that question. So I think that's where the support and the coalition of private sector governments who are ambitious about about having companies operating globally, and also, of course, governments that has high risk coming together through civil society or through other organizations is a very, very, empowerment tool. I think also there, I want to be also practical on solutions. So MSCN got together very much based on these 3 questions. Today, we are 200 companies. We have this value chain approach, which is, again, the multinationals, the local SMEs, and everybody in the middle, because sometimes we talk about the big companies and small companies, we forget the one who's in the middle. So we have that value chain. But then, of course, to bring this to a practical level where you can have impact, you need to recognize that you need to get the governments who also where the risk occurs, right? And I think there's been so much, you can't talk about corruption, oh my God, don't approach the government. But we have been successful in 11 countries now where we engage with governments, we bring them to the table, we are very practical. We don't necessarily sit and talk about corruption. We talk about the implications of what is it that, for us specifically, happening in the maritime trade? What is it, what kind of knots do we need to solve to make sure that trade becomes more efficient, also making it beneficial for the governments who are actually taking part in that agenda. And I think that's also a huge push for the private sector. When they're sitting next to someone, a government that has been a challenge for years, or they have certain perceptions, being able to bring the government and show that, yeah, if we all come together, we can actually maybe solve a few things. So I want to end with a few things about one of the solutions we have put on the table is in our in-country programs. We have different stages on how we engage. The first one is really like get that handshake from the government. That involves a lot of meetings, a lot of tea drinking, a lot of like knowledge on why is trade important for this particular government? How can we articulate the issue around corruption? And every country we've entered, everybody has told, oh, it's completely impossible, it can never change, oh, you cannot work with this government. We were traveling to one country where they say, you can't mention that you're an NGO, you can't talk about the country, you can't talk about corruption. So my team member is going, like, what am I going to talk about, So there are these, I think, again, we talk about perceptions, we talk about what we think we cannot talk about. But once we come to one of the last stages of our collective action program, we have something called a help desk, which is the Ghostbuster line, right? Who are you going to call? It is so in 3 countries now we've implemented this when the government is mature enough to take accountability. So a captain. Again, coming back to the story about who is actually in the center of this, the one who faced the risk, can call MACN and our local partners, which I should also give full recognition to. Some of them are here, they're fantastic. Call up the line and say, I've been faced with potential corruption amount, or is this really a fine, or should they come on board? And, and then we can actually seek our local partners. We have CBI from Nigeria, I'm not sure if they're here. Yes, whoa. They then work with the government and saying there's something's not right, something's happening here and now, and the government together with MACN and our partners go into solution mode. So, and that's where you really have accountability with the government. You have some concrete evidence that fighting corruption is really, really working. And you have something that is suitable for business. It's not going to take 6 months. The vessel is not stuck there for 6 months, costing millions of dollars. You actually have a resolution mechanism that works 24/7. So I'm going to end with some of the results we have, for instance, in the country, because I want to give our partners who are here some credit. So I'm going to mention Nigeria, is where something that took up to 7 to 10 days, we're now down to 1 to 4 hours in terms of resolution, right? And that could not have been possible if we didn't have the strong engagement from the private sector, the voice and the tone from an international community is coming together. It would not have worked if we wouldn't have our amazing partners that knows how to put this to the authorities and not offend anyone. We do it in a professional way, and we know how to proceed with the topic. And it would not have worked if we didn't have governments who are really wanted to see trade moving, both governments in high-risk markets and so governments who are very ambitious about this agenda. So I think that's the true capture of collective action, and also showcasing some of the results. So thank you.
No, that's great. I'll be very curious to hear what your colleague did talk about to be able to keep things on the table. But I think that you picked up on something that Kasai had mentioned as well, and just the importance of how we frame things and how we get the message across. But then also you hit on the point that not shying down or backing down from a challenge. You work in difficult places, and if you had just listened to, you can't do that there in the same way you can't say that. You've really moved the needle, I think, in that space, which is good to see, and you're showing the results. So last but not least, we thought in our conversation on the private sector panel, we would make sure to include not only a former private sector colleague, but also someone currently operating in the private sector to really give us a strong perspective on on that side. And so I'd like to introduce Alexei, the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer of Lundbeck, to share about that perspective.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brooke, and thank you to my panel. I can say that my father is a ship captain, so some of the stories is probably what brought me here in the first place. I would also like to mention what you, Jose, mentioned in terms of the money. Yes, money matters, and it's very evident that companies are there also for the money. Money also brings great talents into the companies. Money also helps developing medicine, specifically for us in pharmaceutical industry, for our patients, and many more. But money is not the only thing in the equation. I think especially now when the reputation is such an important part of the equation. For us in the pharmaceutical industry, but also beyond the pharmaceutical industry, compliance is actually a good business case. And now I'm not speaking about litigation, penalties, avoiding losing your license to operate, avoiding bad media publicity, and so forth. I'm actually speaking about attracting the talents as well. People want to be part of something great. People want to be part of the company that they are proud working for. And this is also how we see it, that compliance is actually a good business case. And also back to what you also mentioned, Claudia, what's in it for me, I trust that what's in it for me is quite clear. It's basically ethics, sustainability, being part of something greater. Yes, you are part of the private sector, but at the same time, you are actually contributing to the world and to the society in general. It really helps transitioning from a short-term approach much more into long-term. And over the course of this conference, we've heard different people speaking about, taking it from the enforcement into building a culture, and a recent panel discussion taking it from the prevention and bringing it to enforcement. So I guess it might be a little bit confusing, but I can share what's important for me, and that is very much about building that culture of integrity. Because enforcement is very often about treating the symptoms. It's not very often about identifying the root cause. So I would much rather go for the root cause. We also heard some people speaking about, how we cannot do this by ourselves, how business should be part of the solution, and how businesses can apply positive peer pressure. And I think this is quite important. In our company, Lundbeck, we are a global pharmaceutical company. We operate over 30 countries across North America, South America, Europe, Middle East, Asia, Africa, and Australia. And our medicines are present in more countries through our distributors and general supply chain. So as you might imagine, looking at the map of the world, and now I'm remembering the Transparency International map, there are some countries that are rather yellow, but there are also many countries that are relatively red. So you cannot really apply the same standards very often. So what it actually means building a culture of integrity? Well, it's actually also about being flexible very often. And what I mean by flexible is really identifying what's needed here and now. We'd like to see this as a constant struggle between principle-driven and rule-based. I would love to have principles. Because we cannot anticipate any single situation that might occur in the business. I would like our CEO and down to the field sales employees to know what to do and what's the right thing to do in any situation. But at the same time, we also realized there are cultural differences, there are legal differences, and many other differences. And another thing that I've also learned in my career is common sense is not that common very often. So in order to build the culture of integrity, you need to sometimes speak the same language, sometimes also be able to speak different language, and really navigate where you actually can build a principle-driven, but also when you actually need procedures and better controls and better requirements in place. Our compliance program is based on OECD and some of the guidance of the Department of Justice, of Office of Inspector General, and some other good practices. I will not go through this right now, also in favor of time. But what I would really like to emphasize is that for us in our company, internal, whatever we do internal, we are very proud of. Internal is great, but external is even greater. So we are, as a company, we are part of IFPMA, which is the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations. And just to be clear, I am not authorized to speak on behalf of IFPMA, but with Lundbeck being a member company of IFPMA, and me being part of Ethics and Business Integrity Committee, and also the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officers Roundtable, I can see a lot of impact that we can actually drive. And I can see I have my peer over there. There is a lot of impact that we can drive within the IFPMA on the entire pharmaceutical industry globally. Because very often businesses, and this is what's not really often understood, we can drive impact not just within our company or within the business partners and supply chain. We very often can drive impact across the entire industry to set what's minimum standard, what's the right thing to do for us in general, how do we behave, to your point, how do we behave as the industry, and hopefully some of these better practices are also being interpreted and taken in other industries and beyond the specific geography. So very shortly on why incentivizing the private sector as a game changer. Well, I believe enforcement is actually quite important. I think enforcement is very important when it matters. For the big cases, for the companies that lost their ethical compass. But at the same time, small enforcement very often takes time and focus away from self-regulation, from building the culture of integrity, and from many more positive reinforcement initiatives that are being taken at the company. We've also learned from one of the previous panels that prosecution here and now does not always work to build a culture of ethics. So in essence, I would like this to be much more of a balance, because right now we do see in private sector a lot of enforcement, and we would love to see a lot more of these positive initiatives with the governments, with NGOs, with other stakeholders, making sure that we can actually, to the point, co-create the culture of integrity going forward.
Thank you so much. There's so many different directions we could go. I think there's a lot of richness in the conversation. I do want to turn it over to the participants for questions or comments. I will note that we do have English-Spanish translation, and there are headsets. I apologize for not saying that at the outset. So if you do have a question, please make sure that you speak slowly so that our translators can translate it into the language other than how you communicate it. And I see we already have one, and I apologize, the lights are a little bright up here, so we're on stage, but I will kick it right over that. I will not use the moderator's privilege.
Sorry about my English, but my name is Hernán Lanzara. I am Vice President of the Lima Chamber of Commerce. I'm in charge also of the integrity and fight against corruption in my organization. And for the following months, I have received the charge of Chief Chairman of the Advisory Committee of Alliance for Integrity in Peru. Thanks for all your comments. Thanks for all the work you are doing to support the initiatives with private sector. But business sector representative, I think I have to talk that we are very involved and compromised with the establishment of a culture of integrity in Peru. And for almost 20 years, we have been working with Proética, who is the Peruvian chapter of Transparency International in Peru. We have worked with the academy, with the government, with the Congress representatives, and we have developed almost 200 workshops for small and medium business, because our organization gathered almost 10,000 small and medium business in Peru. And recently we have developed a program, a training program for future public servants, so addressed to university students of the 2 last years that have expressed the intention to work with the state as public servant. Why I'm telling this? Because I think maybe I'm going to ask our moderator to try to pass this information or this request to the organization of the IACC. We can create for the future a space for the business organization to try to share, to show what we are doing, and try to take contact with a lot of organizations, as the ones are represented here, to try to maybe encounter or find collaboration spaces. We are very grateful for all you have done in our countries to try to develop and to incentivize the compliance and all the integrity in our countries, but we also have something to say and to show, and maybe it could be more enriquecer and make more rich the work we are doing here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. That's very well noted, and I think that the hearing from local associations and creating that voice is very important. So it's well noted. I don't know if anyone else wants to echo on that. Yep.
Yeah, I think sorry, yeah, please. What I just wanted to say to that as well is that it's quite impressive. Like, okay, I'm a bit biased because my region is Latin America, and you talked about the Alliance for Integrity, of course, but participating in many meetings also where a lot of Latin American companies have been present, I have seen that especially there, the compliance officers and the people that work with ethics and integrity, they have made like a leapfrogging. It was a little bit in the beginning, it was all new, especially in Brazil, it was all new. And then after a certain point, I realized that they have got to a point where some of the European companies and some of the American companies will be like really happy to learn from as well. Mm-hmm. So this is why I think it's important that we create these kind of spaces where you can exchange and where you can really learn from each other, and this on an eye level and not being like Eurocentristic and American-centristic the whole time, talking about compliance and integrity, etc. This is something that co-creation is something that doesn't go only in multi-stakeholder, that we also need to do on a global scale for it to be actually effective as well, and listen a bit more sometimes also. Just wanted to say that.
Go ahead.
Just one, now that you were talking about business chambers, something really very important that we have seen within our programs and is working with them. So linking it up with what was said by Cecilia, it's like who you're going to call. I think there's an approach, a workable approach within the business chambers on many different sectors to help in terms of anti-corruption and compliance. So it's not a bottom-up progress or assessment. It's also not a up-bottom assessment. It could be also side to side. And business chamber, usually they start working on a progression, and usually they do capacity building and the trainings, and that's fine. But I've seen, and what we have supported some of the business chambers in Mexico within USAID is that they're eager to do something more that apart from training, and they work side by side. All the different companies within their chamber, and then when who you're going to call, it's your same companies, like the other companies. Some of them are competition, but it's fine. Like you're working together within the business chamber, and business chambers work well in terms of profit and other things. But now they're working also in terms of compliance and integrity, helping each other out, which is very, very good. Yeah.
Kisai, did you have something that you wanted to add as well? Nope. Okay.
That's fine.
I see a question over here, and then we'll go over here. So there's one there and there. Oh, sorry. We'll take both of them. Are there three of you? Two of you?
No, now three.
Three. Okay.
Ekat Kashelashvili, Senior Director at Dexis Consulting Group, and we have a privilege of being part of the journey in Mexico with the program that has been described. But my question is more sort of global right now. Banking sector. I worked for a number of years previously in Ukraine in anti-corruption program. So what we found it quite interesting is how much banking sector is part of the process. So we speak about the loaning and then access to the capital, whether inside of the country or raising capital outside. And especially in the European scene with the likes like EBRDs and then banks that can really give you the cheap loan, but then it is accompanied with the condition of having strong and sound compliance mechanisms. Could be one of the ways of thinking through how make it more holistic so that it could be that what's in it for me could be easier seen by the companies in that way and actually benefiting for them in terms of the growth. And if you came across of any of the examples of that, would be good to hear from you, and what would your reflections be on that. And on SOEs, in our experience, what worked well was a combination of both corporate governance and compliance. Compliance is in so many ways part of the corporate governance, and if corporate governance is not changing, good guys in compliance are sort of an island that is sometimes seen as provocateurs, so to say, by those who do the business decisions. So corporate governance aligning itself with the way how the compliance moves forward gives very sustainable results in the way that we've seen in our experience as well. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ana Aranha from United Nations Global Compact. I would like to focus on the incentivizing part. We recently launched at Global Compact, UNODC, and OECD resource guide on incentives for business integrity, which incentivizes the governments to implement incentives for business integrity. And my question to the panelists is, what's the role that you see on these incentives, like formal incentives for compliance programs for business integrity? Do you think they should be there, or companies should be good, like by principle, and why should we implement incentives?
Okay, we're going to do 2 and 2 just so that I can hold them in my brains and we don't overload the panelists. So we'll see if who would like to take the banking question. Yep, Jose Luis.
I think I will kind of mention it. We don't work with banks in USAID Mexico, but USAID Paraguay does, and they have quite a good example. This has been a slow start process there, but because banks are banks, there's a lot of secrecy within banks. They're really like really hard shell institutions, but I think there's a point that there's a turnover point that we've seen within our mission in Paraguay, and the work that is being done there is so the banking system as a system and the banks per se are working with the anti-corruption prosecutor office there. So what was happening is that the cases that the banks had or any other institution had, and then they sent it to the prosecutor or to the anti-corruption office, had a format of information that was not the same that was requested for the prosecutor. So that change within the information was a cause of dispute and was a cause for not action for many of those corruption issues or cases that were prosecuted or not prosecuted. So now they're working together in terms of like facilitating the same formats and having a direct call from the bank to the prosecutor office saying like, I had this case, I want to acknowledge it. It's like, okay, this is you know the information, just send it in as soon as you can, as you have it, and they're working together. So that's an opportunity that have been seen on the banking system that I've known.
Thanks. Other thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think I can agree more on that one. I mean, as I mentioned, the situation as of what it is in the local SOEs, compliance is the first thing that they need to do first. And then further, it will go to the adoption of principle of good corporate governance or something. And, there's a disparity of capacity between the national SOEs and local SOEs. And with that, I think, having them both as an approach to improve the situation is the best option to go. Yeah, I think that.
Maybe Cecilia and Alexi, if you could talk a little bit about the incentives question.
Do you want to? I think incentives in general is quite hard, both for the private sector and also for government to work on the incentive, especially in-house. How do you reward the right behavior? Especially, I think, and we have actually looked for this. I think the best example I have from my industry is safety, because safety is and it's maybe a negative incentive, but safety is a core part of many of the businesses that we have. And there's one company who said if there are any severe safety incidents, death happening in our company, the whole management bonuses is cut. So it doesn't matter if you're the general counsel, it doesn't matter if you're the CFO, everybody is responsible for safety. And that kind of incentive, although you can argue it's negative, but it's like then you really integrate that this is a core priority. It doesn't matter if you're on a vessel, serving a vessel, or if you are doing the accounts, this is what matters, right? I think that's the best, but it's also about life and death, right? So it should matter, right? But I do think incentives are hard. I think a starting point for companies in particular is to make sure there's not conflict between priorities. I think if we can get so far, so key performance indicators, which is a lot, KPIs, where a lot of companies and employees are measured by, doesn't really necessarily affect ethics. If we can come that far and do like a whole review of all the companies and just make sure there's no conflict in behavior, I would almost say I think that's the starting point, and that will also incentivize a certain type of behavior, right? That would be my perspective to at least the private sector incentivizing behavior, the right behavior.
Sure, and on incentives as well, I fully agree. Incentives is actually quite hard to define as well. Of course, there are incentives from the government to the private sector. And this is, I think I've already mentioned a couple of days ago, that I see a lot of good ones as well in terms of the, for example, public procurement, where having a robust compliance program is a prerequisite to be part of the public tenders. I think that actually helps a lot. And there are other ones. In terms of the internal incentives, I can also say that what we are measuring is a little bit difficult to actually formalize it well. Because if you say, well, we want the compliance score to increase or anything else kind of, to look better, we are actually afraid of just a lot of window dressing. So in order to avoid it, some of our incentives or some of our performance indicators when it comes to compliance are about if we come across an issue, how willing and how fast the management can solve it. And that actually incentivizes, rather than actually trying to hide things, like I've also, in my audit days, as an auditor, I've also seen previously incentives such as like, we don't want any findings. Well, guess what? I mean, what it creates is not necessarily a culture of integrity. What it creates is a culture of hiding things that, the auditor should not find any findings. That's very clear. So in essence, making sure that we can formulate it well, that we can actually speak up and discuss things openly. And if there are issues, then we solve the issues. And I think that's something that we could also share more across the companies as well, and with the government.
I want to share, yeah, go ahead.
Just add one one thing to that. I think it's really important if you develop these kind of incentive mechanisms that you put on a little bit the lens of do no harm as well, especially when you look at small companies. It's important to bring people together and look at how you want to design them so that you ensure that you do not restrict access, for example, to public tender just because you have like an idea of how a compliance system should look like, and smaller companies cannot achieve that. And also that you do not overburden the public sector with needing to review and see how efficient a compliance system actually is, because most of the people that are sitting there most likely will not be able to do that ad hoc. They would need to learn about it as well. And like, even some of our experts are not able to actually predict if it's an effective compliance system or if it's just for show. So just keeping in mind bringing people together to develop it collectively is most likely the best approach for that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I've also, in the work that we've done, have heard a lot around to potentially negative with positive unintended consequences or positive benefits in this space, and the first of those is actually legislation and regulation. I think it's certainly incentivized the extractive industry to increase their supply chain due diligence at the risk of having to report for federal regulations has certainly moved the needle. And then the second, interestingly enough, is, and not surprising, I would say, is often the reputational risk plays such a huge role that companies can have a genuine commitment after a scandal or exposure and really move the needle in this space and become a game changer for incentivizing integrity within their own organizations. And so I think also there needs to be an appetite and a willingness to be willing to engage with a company who has had a public scandal and is truly committed to then using that as an opportunity for growth. So we'll go here and then over here.
Peter Van Veen, I'm on the board of Transparency International. I had a question about, a slightly different question on civil society space. It's shrinking in most countries. And do you think companies have a role to play in protecting civil society, or at least supporting civil society? And I'd like to hear maybe some examples, because one of the things that worries me about some of the initiatives is that they sound like they are replacing what civil society traditionally does in where you operate, and is that, are you managing that? Are you supporting civil society in those countries as well? And if I take the TI perspective, I'd be interested to hear of examples where perhaps you are collaborating with Transparency International local chapters, or for example, the Global Health Initiative for pharma companies and health ministries. Thank you.
Right over here, sorry.
Sorry, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Lola Adekonye. I'm from the Center for International Private Enterprise, and I lead our business-led, business-centered anti-corruption programs for sub-Saharan Africa. I'm based in Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you. This is so interesting. All of what you've been talking about is the sort of thing that we always go back to our strategy board every now and again and sort of talk about. And my question is sort of a flip on the subject or focus of the incentives. And I was speaking with Soji earlier. It's quite thought-provoking. He asked me the same question, so I'm throwing it at the panel now because it's the question of incentives for governments who are partners on collective action programs, because in Nigeria and many of the countries that we work in, high risk for corruption countries, the reason that they're high risk for corruption is because there are just lots of macroeconomic, social, and political reasons why corruption seems to pay, at least in the short term, or most actors, especially on the public sector side, are highly motivated or incentivized to engage in corrupt activity. But a few times you find that one leader or you find an institution that's willing to swim against the tide and work fastidiously with a collective action program. And so the question is, in your experience, what are those motivating factors that has encouraged government officials and public institutions to come on board to work with, the collective action programs that you have been engaged in to achieve these anti-corruption reforms and results that sometimes puts a target on their back?
So maybe, because I saw you making notes on the civil society space, so maybe we'll start with you on that question.
Tough. I mean, yes, we do work with the society. So like what I was sharing, working with the SOE actually is we call it kind of collaborative governance, where actually the society is the partner in improving the condition. The challenge with the civil society sometimes is their capacity to really play that role. The space for Indonesian case, then there is I can say diverse two situations. At national level, then the space is still there, and then at the local level, then also a challenge in the way like how they can really influence the process. Apart from the issues of capacity, there's also issue about the funding mechanism for them to do the activism. Yes, you've heard a lot on the shrinking space, but myself, I question what space are actually being defined this one that is shrinking. For Indonesian case, the civil society with specific, skills, then they still can do the activism that they do. In Indonesia, you can speak anything as you like, as long as it is not contradictory to reality. That's one thing. But on the other part, there's also the intention by those in the government to abuse the rubber regulation, we can say, like a regulation which is so flexible to be abused. Then that's come to the situation where we call the shrinking space. But as what we are doing right now, we do support that one. In Indonesia, we are also developing a new civil society programming, building upon the last program that focus more into collaborative governance, where it's really space for them to work together collaboratively to improve the delivery of services. I think that's the point I can share.
I think regarding that question, something important is we work a lot in Mexico with civil society for anti-corruption, and also we have started we work a lot with the private sector. But what we're now looking is for civil society to support business integrity. And we have right now we have an open call for civil society to bring up proposals and they can get a grant. It's really hard because civil society is doing their own thing around anti-corruption, and you name it, public procurement and all that, and the private sector is doing their own thing. But it's hard to find a civil society that it's merged with the private sector, even though they get funds from the private sector, but to get something and build up something together. We now have some programs that are directed in that regard. For example, one NGO in one particular state works on business integrity and helps businesses on their compliance and integrity procedures, which is really great. But we're looking for other ones in terms of regulation, for example. And it combats also the shrinking of civil society's participation. One, because they help each other, they form synergies. And then once the private sector sees civil society as a help handy, they can give funds to civil society. So it's like a sustainable loop that they can work together. But it's something that we're looking into. But it's hard. But I think now, so even right now, we also launched a massive online open course on business integrity directed to civil society, so they can understand the role of civil society within business integrity. And it's now growing. Well, I can say that. Yeah.
Maybe I can add to that a little bit, because from the perspective of the Alliance for Integrity, we have been designed right in the beginning also to build capacity not only within SMEs, but also within the civil society organizations that are working with us. So they are completely crucial for every kind of work that we are doing with business integrity, not only as watchdogs, but also developing tools, developing standards, and also pressing for specific standards, which is something that not everybody can do in the same way. And what is happening now with the Alliance for Integrity, we are in a part of a transition phase where a lot of civil society organizations that have previously been part of our network are now taking over our activities. They are really receiving training and they are now implementing. TI is one of them in Ghana, for example. The Ghana Integrity Initiative, Transparency International in Indonesia is now implementing our activities in Indonesia. We have the UN Global Compact in Brazil and in India implementing our activities. We have local NGOs, grassroots NGOs as well in Paraguay implementing, and in Peru as well. So we have somebody here. So it's a little bit like seeing the space shrinking. For us, the solution was to really capacitate the civil society that is already there to take over, and also supporting them with trying to find funding, because this is a quite important topic that nobody likes to touch on, but it's something that is crucial for civil society organizations and for collective actions in general to be able to continue to support this kind of endeavor. So for us, it's also a transition and a learning phase. We are working with the civil society organizations to do so, and we are really appreciative also of them wanting to take over this, because they also see added value to their own organizations and being able to address business integrity effectively. So.
Yeah, 2 points on that too to pick up. That I think when we I think it's a really important question, and when we did Doing Business with Integrity, when we issued the call and we received 100 concepts, it was a very pleasant and surprising mix of solutions that were proposed directly by the private sector or private sector actors, including small and medium enterprises, and civil society, non-governmental organizations who had partnered with the private sector. And I think we're increasingly seeing that it's not an either or, that it's a both and that's moving. And then the second point that I would note as well is that I do think in closed spaces, you have examples where civil society may be shut down and the private sector actually can be the remaining force that can advance the democratic governance principles, both in how they operate internally and in holding that space, because they often are allowed to continue to operate or permitted to continue to operate in spaces where civil society won't, and they're able to still address some of the social issues as well. So, because I'll go to you quickly, and then we'll go over to the second question.
Say that on this funding, I think the locally led development that USAID is approaching is something that we do work a lot in Indonesia. So like this activity that we're doing is implemented and led by Indonesian civil society, and a lot of other funding from USAID is actually run by a local CSO. So just adding that one. Yeah.
So, Cecilia, how did you get port authorities in Nigeria to engage on countering corruption? What incentivized them?
Or in other countries, I think that Nigeria is a good point. But no, but I think this is, you will find it ironic that I'm saying it, but we have to start talking about corruption, right? Like when you have, if we continue to say corruption is bad, we have done that for 50, 100 years and things have not moved. So I think it's just time to come up with new arguments. And I think we have to start thinking on who is actually, if you go to Nigeria, I mean, we have two Nigerians here. If I come and I say Nigeria is corrupt, the person in front of me have either heard it 100 times from other people, or they don't care, to be honest, right? I mean, there are two things. It doesn't have to be Nigeria, it can be any other country, right? So I think as an anti-corruption champion, we have a job to really try to articulate what are the consequences. So we need to motivate the person who is in front of me, or who anyone is in front, to come to the table. And that is not to say your department is corrupt or your country is corrupt. That is really to say, I had the knowledge to understand what the consequences are for corruption. So not even, that's why I say, don't even talk about corruption. It's not about that. It's about saying, for us, trade implications. This is the cost. This is the loss of society. Very, very detailed is extremely important. I think that was one of the successes, that we don't keep it on a high level. we're not even primarily starting to address it with anti-corruption agencies. We're really talking to authorities who have their mandate to do things better in the trade agenda. And that is the starting point. And then, of course, the push from international business. You know, when you have, I can give you a very practical example, when you're standing in a particular canal and you are just pointing at these massive assets passing you and you say, here's a member, here's a member, here's a member. The government are directly incentivized to come to the table because they say, okay, there is industry mass behind this, so it's beneficial for us to come to the table. We're not coming to the table to get slapped. We're not coming to the table to be accused of something we may or may not recognize. We are coming to the table because it's beneficial for us. And we have to turn that conversation around. If you're a civil society organization, if you're the private sector, doesn't matter. We have to start, I think that's going to be my closing, we have to start just talking about corruption is bad. We have to be much better and articulate the consequences, the results of what you can do to improve whoever is in front of you that you want to influence.
Alexi, I know we're at time, but I want to give you a chance to say if you have any reflections from the pharmaceutical side of things.
No, I think it's the general reflection is, of course, there might be different experiences for different people as well within the working with ethics and compliance. Some of my experiences as basically compliance people to speaking to other compliance people about how compliance is important. I think what I've also was one of my reflection from this event, from this conference, is that we actually really need to identify and involve some of the other actors, some of the other stakeholders, because there is actually a willingness. There is a willingness to co-create and establish something better.
So I'd like ending on a positive note. I want to thank our translators, the organizers and facilitators, our esteemed panelists, you all for coming, and I will leave you with a parting thought, which is a challenge in terms of where can you be a first mover or a game changer to incentivize the private sector to be a part of the fight against corruption? So thank you very much.